Bitcoin and the President Bukele start to make our country believe again.
Welcome to the CryptoCounsel at Wiley. We are the podcast that decodes the most important crypto disputes in law and regulation. I'm Josh, an international lawyer who does crypto.
And I'm Frank, a securities litigator who also does crypto.
Frank, I'm excited to get into the quick bits today.
Let's do it.
Quick bit number one. There's news lately that Craig Wright has been referred in the UK for perjury charges. Craig Wright is someone who has claimed to be Bitcoin inventor Satoshi Nakamoto. This follows years of litigation, lots of disputes involving Craig Wright. But the question that I have for you, Frank, is why does someone want to be Satoshi Nakamoto?
Well, I think Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin wallet is like tens of billions of dollars. So that's one fairly compelling reason to want to be him. The other, and this is just sort of my own speculation, is that the Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego game. They want to be the subject of a Where in the World is Satoshi Nakamoto, a new hit series for children.
Speaking of, how do you stay hidden with that many billions?
I mean, it is one of the great mysteries of the world.
Maybe one of these days the CryptoCounsel will resolve it.
Perhaps.
For now, the mystery remains, so we're on to quick bit number two. It's been reported that in the first half of 2024, political donors have given approximately $3 million to Trump's campaign in cryptocurrency. That comprises $1.8 million of Bitcoin, $900,000 of Ether, and perhaps most interestingly, $300 worth of Dogecoin. Frank, I know you're a Dogecoin fan, so when you do your political or charitable giving, do you prefer Dogecoin?
Love the Doge. My theory here is that for every Dogecoin that a candidate accepts, they get like 5 or 10 times Musk bucks. So it's sort of like, in exchange for the Doge, you get a little bit of Elon Musk cold hard cash.
That does seem like a pretty good deal.
I mean, it's real. The Dogecoin is real. The Dogeverse, I think, by the way, has died. Just FYI, an update to a previous podcast.
My dreams are dashed.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of payments in cryptocurrency, there's been reporting of a settlement between FTX, famous in the crypto world for its bankruptcy and claims related to Sam Bankman-Fried, has reached a settlement with the United States Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, for $12.7 billion. At the same time, it's being reported that many FTX creditors have a preference for being paid in cryptocurrency rather than in U.S. dollars. So now that the CFTC is sitting on this potential settlement of $12.7 billion, do you think they'll prefer to be paid in U.S. dollars or in crypto?
I think the United States government still believes that cash is king.
So cash is king for the U.S. government, but Bitcoin is at least a new king or a rising prince for another government. Do you know which one that is, Frank?
El Rey, perhaps, for a government that you may be talking to someone about on today's podcast, Josh?
That's right. We have an official from that government here to talk about a place where Bitcoin can be used to pay the government, even your taxes, and that is the country of El Salvador. We are delighted to have as our guest today Mardoqueo Tóchez, who is Minister Consular at the Embassy of El Salvador here in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who may not have followed the worldwide news, El Salvador has been a path-breaking country over the past recent years, the subject of an incredible amount of attention, excitement, debate, because it is the first country to pass a law making Bitcoin official legal tender. So we're going to have lots of questions about that, and you're the expert. Thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you for the invitation.
Before we get into the substance, tell us about your role on behalf of El Salvador at the embassy.
Yes, I came here like 4 years ago And at the beginning, I was supposed to start to work in the political section. But then the guy who was managing all the economical section went to be an ambassador in some country from El Salvador. So they decided I have to take care of all the investments and trade. Right now, we're two people working on it. I'm working more in investments, and my colleague, Carlos Girol, is working in trade. And that's the main thing. I'm trying to bring all the people from the United States to come to El Salvador and invest. Yeah.
Well, you come from an international law background, right?
Yes. Well, actually, as a lawyer, that's the first big issue when I came over here, because I was a lawyer. But right now, I understand that it's not just the technical part that you have to know about the investments. It's more like the relationships. And I'm working on it. Like I'm working with good relationships with the friends that are making me the staying here in Washington easy. Yeah, but I'm a lawyer in El Salvador, and I have some master degrees in law, doctoral degree in law, but also I have a business international diploma from one university of El Salvador. So yeah, I'm more in law than in economics, but I'm doing here the best I can.
You are in the right place, because we are at the intersection of law and economics, and particularly the law and regulation of cryptocurrencies. So 4 years ago, when you came to Washington, D.C., Bitcoin was not the legal tender of El Salvador.
Yes. And I can make you a confession over here that I was one of the guys who doesn't believe anything about Bitcoin. Like, I was really skeptical about it. Even I was invited for a friend a long time ago to invest when the Bitcoin was $250. And I said, why are you doing this, bro? Why are you doing this? And right now that I understand, because this is the main problem, that I think that these kind of channels are important for the people who doesn't know about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to start to get information about it. And this is a good opportunity to give all the education that you can have to these people.
Well, speaking of learning about Bitcoin, El Salvador elected as president a young, charismatic leader, Nayib Bukele, a few years ago, and lots of interesting developments in the country. There have been commentary about his approach to crime and how the country was once called a murder capital and now is one of the safest countries in the world. So he's known for a lot of things, but one of the things that is most famous, and which we'll be talking about today, started in 2021. He made a speech at a Bitcoin conference in Miami, Florida. And that speech, I think, started a series of dominoes falling that have really shaken up a lot of things in the country. Did you see that speech coming?
Well, actually, no. I mean, at that time, I was one guy who was skeptical about Bitcoin. And when I heard about Bitcoin, our president, I started to read about it. And I have the opportunity to travel with our ambassador to this mining facility in Rockdale, Texas. And I started to talk with this guy that right now is one of my best friends, Marshall Long. And he was talking about the importance to get Bitcoin mining for El Salvador. That how you could, if you get all the machines doing Bitcoin for you, how this project can change our people's life. And that conversation really touched me, and I decided to read about it. I started to see some books and do my little investigation about Bitcoin. And when I understand how everything's working, I said, wow, the president was really, really, really bright guy who understand that this is the future and the main thing for our country, because it wasn't just making an announcement. This announcement give us the opportunity to bring to El Salvador a lot of people who they didn't know what El Salvador was. And right now we have a lot of tourists just for trying to see how can they purchase products for your Bitcoins. It's a good thing. It's a really important thing for us that the president make that decision.
That is so fascinating. When I've been reading and learning about the path of El Salvador, and particularly with respect to Bitcoin, something that comes up over and over is that people who knew the country see a new hope there, a new optimism, a new excitement. And I want to drill down a little bit on the specifics of what does that look like legally first, because we can talk about the implementation and the concept, but focusing on the law. And I want to make sure I get this right. I love the name of the law that was passed in El Salvador. I think it's La Ley Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
It's great. So simple and clear, the Bitcoin law.
Yeah. And as a lawyers, we know that the first thing that has to come is the people trying to do something. They are the creatives to start to do business, and then the government start to do a law for it. So basically, the president made the announcement, but the Bitcoin was working in El Salvador because some people start to do a podcast about it, and they was thinking in doing in this little city called El Zonte in La Libertad, a project that everybody can use Bitcoin in that city. And it started like a conversation for two people, and then start to have a lot of calls from everybody around the world, and they start to do this wallet in El Salvador. And there were the place where Bitcoin started, in Playa El Zonte. So basically, what the president did is doing this law that allows you using Bitcoin in El Salvador. And they don't charge you for the capital gain of the Bitcoin. If you have your Bitcoin and going to spend in El Salvador, and you bought your Bitcoin in 1 cent, and right now is 73, 74, or 64, you can use it and you don't pay gain taxes for it.
That's better than the United States, right?
Yeah, better than everywhere, yes.
One other fascinating feature of the law that I read is that tax payments can be made in Bitcoin.
Yes. Actually, the government start to open some. The first thing that they can do when they do the law is start to make this happen. So everything was in proof and error because it was the first place where you start to use Bitcoin. So basically, at the beginning, they start to open channels for the people using Bitcoin. And we made the wallet that it was for using Bitcoin for Salvadorans. So you can open your wallet here in the United States and send remittances to El Salvador. And this thing opened the door because it was almost 4 million wallets that were open in El Salvador. And right now they are using the wallet. But you have to understand that you just don't have to put the law. You have to get education to the people. And when we start to do education to educate our people, it was some bad press that were talking bad about Bitcoin because there is a lot of people who doesn't want to Bitcoin comes to our countries. And that's why I think some people is skeptical already to using Bitcoin. And you cannot force something to happen in our country. So the president was smart and said, okay, the Bitcoin is a legal tender in El Salvador. You can spend your Bitcoin, but we don't have the technology yet to use it in a good way. So basically, if you don't have the technology and you have your own company, you can decide if you can use Bitcoin in your company or not. For me, all the lawyers, at least my friends, when I'm going to talk with them, say, why are you not opening any wallet and receiving payments in Bitcoin? Everybody's coming over here to spend Bitcoins. And if you are not prepared to receive Bitcoins as a lawyer, you will be out because there were another lawyers before that start to understand how does it work. Even right now, if I was there, I think I was the best promoting Bitcoin wallets in El Salvador, because I understand that in the long term, this will be huge. This will be huge. Already for us, it's huge because since we started the Bitcoin, it was a lot of problems because the bad press. Like everybody was talking bad about Bitcoin. A lot of people decide to not invest in Bitcoin, not receiving Bitcoin. But I think at the end, the history will give the president the opportunity to say that he was right.
A few thoughts on that. First, if the government of El Salvador is willing to receive its tax payments in Bitcoin, I think we as lawyers should be willing to receive our fees in Bitcoin too, right?
Yes.
Yes. On the resistance, it was also interesting to see that there has been this skepticism. I saw that there were engagements with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, other entities, other governments that had doubts. And setting aside the long-term hope and optimism of this, there is this question of implementation, and it's not forced, but there are incentives. And one of those incentives, the wallet that you mentioned, the Chivo wallet, was that anyone who downloaded the wallet would receive $30 in Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, for spending $30. They receive Bitcoin for the government, and they can spend the money not taking cash out. They will use the Bitcoin wallet to purchase some goods in Bitcoin. Yeah.
And how have the people taken to this? I know that it's a challenge to,
yes,
even in the United States, there's still doubts and skepticism about how do we implement Bitcoin? How do we make the payments work? How has that been rolled out in El Salvador?
As I said at the beginning, the main problem is education. We have to work hard to give more information about Bitcoin, because even right now, like in some social media, there are a lot of people who are scamming people using Bitcoin as the hook to get all your money. I send messages and say, okay, if you want to make a lot of money, send me your money and I will invest your money in Bitcoin. So these kind of things are hurting the main project that Bitcoin is.
Which is really unfortunate because those are old school frauds. These are scams, whereas Bitcoin is inherently transparent.
Yes.
It's meant to be open, visible, clear. How has that affected government policy, the transparency of Bitcoin in terms of the government's activities?
Well, actually, you know that this is the main thing over here, that in the blockchain, everything is public, everything is there. So basically what the criticals from Bitcoin are saying that you can do money laundering with Bitcoin, you can do scams with Bitcoin, you can do a lot of things in Bitcoin. But I think it's easy to do it with real cash, with fiat, that do it with Bitcoin. Because if you don't put your money at the bank, nobody knows where the money goes. But you cannot do that with Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be, if I send you some money to you, you will receive it, and it will be on the blockchain, all the transactions that you have to do. The president right now is getting this, he's working yet in implementing more ways to do Bitcoin. But as the government is not the one who has to do all the work, the investments will bring another ways to, or another tools to make this thing happen in El Salvador. And there are a lot of companies who decide to go to El Salvador and start to invest in technology, invest in wallets. Actually, we received a call from a huge unicorn, Mexican unicorn called Bitso, that they are interested in going to El Salvador to reinvest more money for develop a Bitcoin business. There are a lot of companies who already are in El Salvador doing all this thing, and that's why my work is easy over here. I'm really happy because my work here in the United States was easy than anybody. First of all, before the President Bukele, you heard about El Salvador and everything is all about the war at the beginning.
Murder capital of the world, right?
Yeah, but at the beginning, in 1980s, it was all about the murders because we were in the civil war. Then it was the gang members. And even there are some people that doesn't know that the Salvatrucha, Mara Salvatrucha, that is the gang from El Salvador, beginning here in the United States, in Los Angeles. And they took all these people to El Salvador. They go to El Salvador and they start to do the gangs members in El Salvador. So everything born here in Los Angeles. And this was a huge thing for us. And I think the measures that the president gets, somebody has to get sometimes. Maybe political is a big hurt for him because he has to do a lot of things that all the political doesn't want to do. But right now, if you see the numbers of the president, is 92% of acceptance. Even the people who was against him right now, they believe, and this is the big thing, Bitcoin and the President Bukele start to make our country believe again.
That's amazing. I can tell you that in the United States, particularly in an election year, no president, as far as I know, has ever enjoyed a 92% approval rating. But going back to that history, another fact about El Salvador's currency is that there was a period of inflation and volatility with the local currency. And I understand that in 2001, the country adopted the U.S. dollar instead, in part because of these concerns with volatility. Bitcoin itself has been volatile over the past few years. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, this is pegged to the timing of some of the developments with President Bukele in the country. June 2021, when the Bitcoin law is passed, Bitcoin's at about $35,000. At the end of that year, it's gone up. It's up $45,000 or $50,000. However, a year later, it's down at $16,000. And today, as you said earlier, we're in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. So we've had changes. To what extent do you think that the policy or the adoption of Bitcoin is dependent on that volatility of the price? Is everyone in favor of Bukele and the president when the price is high, or does it flip?
I think when you understand how Bitcoin works, you just buy Bitcoin and don't think about fiat money. And when we start to do Bitcoin mining in our country, we start to print our own money, but our own money controlled. Because the huge problem with all countries around the world is that they can print any money that they want.
You cannot print more Bitcoin.
We
21 million.
21 million, and that's all. And we have just a couple machines according to what is happening around the world. There are a lot of machines doing Bitcoin. And we just have this cut, the halving, 2 or 3 months ago. And it will be hard to do Bitcoin. But even if you believe what Bitcoin is, I think everybody will feel comfortable to having Bitcoin as something to have on your savings for the future. And I think this, because if you talk about stocks, for example, the stocks are volatile. And you know that one day it could be up or it could be down. Bitcoin works kind of the same as the stock market. It's more volatile, but at the end, the price has to be fixed and controlled when you have less opportunity to do more Bitcoins.
Right. And I think we've seen, knock on wood, less volatility lately, and perhaps as there's more implementation and adoption, there would be less volatility. I think I saw that speech that President Bukele gave in Miami. The price of Bitcoin went up 11% that week. Obviously, that was a big step because it indicated to worldwide markets that if a country is adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, it has more authenticity. More people should take it seriously. It didn't change anything about the blockchain or the code or the nodes, but it did signal something about what Bitcoin is and how it should be accepted. And now looking ahead, and I'm curious on your perspective from the embassy here, other countries are looking at El Salvador. Who do you think's next?
Yes, actually, I have. It was funny because there are some friends of mine who are in the same area in different embassies that start to talk about Bitcoin. And I was reading about Bitcoin since 3 years ago. And when I start to talk with them, and they say, oh, but I don't believe in it. I say, well, yeah, you don't believe in that because you don't read anything about it. You know? If you start to do your own research, you can find that it's not the panacea because it will not solve every problem, but it's an opportunity for you to make something big for the future, for your kids. And that's why I decided to be part of this project on my own and start to purchase Bitcoin. Even the first time that I paid the first $100 in this wallet, and I slept, and the next day I opened the eyes and it was 80. I was pretty scared. What happened? What's happening over here? But I started to understand how does it work. I understand that I cannot lose money, at least that I sell when the price is at the bottom. But if the price is going up and I don't sell, I don't win neither. This is the first thing I have to understand. When you get Bitcoin, you are thinking in a long-term project, for you and your family.
You mentioned that you first learned about it when the price was $250.
Yeah.
There's also the famous purchase of pizzas by Bitcoin, and that person is kicking themselves for spending millions of dollars for a couple pizzas.
Yes.
But maybe some other countries are thinking the same thing. El Salvador is being paid in Bitcoin for taxes, and there are huge amounts of inflationary concerns about currencies around the world. Particularly in Latin America, there have been periods of hyperinflation, and that's caused a lot of challenges globally. Do you think that other countries in Latin America will be following El Salvador's lead?
You know that, as I mentioned, the first step has to be by the people. So when the people understand how Bitcoins work, they will start to purchase Bitcoin, and then the government will start to regulate everything. Because it's a huge problem that the politician, even I was talking with a friend of mine, and I said to him, if we want to this thing happen around the world, we have to do this association, Bitcoin lawyers around the world, because if you want to have these incidents in a country, the first guy who has to be involved and knowing about Bitcoin is the lawyer. Because if some politician goes to his lawyer and said, okay, these people is talking to me about Bitcoin, and the lawyer doesn't know about Bitcoin, oh no, be careful, the scam, or they will use money for laundry. At that time, everything goes out. But if the lawyers start to know how everything's work, I think this is the best way that Bitcoin start to running around the world.
And there's a fascinating global interdependence to this. You mentioned that there's a small amount of Bitcoin mining happening in El Salvador. So you can have a country in which Bitcoin is legal tender and yet Bitcoin is not being mined there. You might much larger presence in Texas where you visited. That's
Yes.
where there are some very significant Bitcoin mining facilities. We've talked about other investments around the world. And yet those operations are in a way sustaining the legal tender of El Salvador or
Yes.
any other country that
Yes.
implements it.
This is your new gold. Like the money was layered for gold at that time. And right now, Bitcoin could be the support of your money. We have dollars, and particularly in 2001, when we changed our colones for dollars, we don't have that opportunity to decide if I want to use dollars or I want to use colones, because they say, okay, dollars and colones will be running around the country, but in 3 months, you wouldn't find any colones anywhere. And it's funny because right now in our country, for example, there are some people who has colones, and if they want to go and purchase something at the store, they will not receive it. If they go to the bank, they have to receive it. But if they want to use it on the streets, they will not get the money.
So for those who don't know, colones was the national currency prior to 2001, correct?
Yes.
Everyone's required to shift to the dollar at that point. And now the people of El Salvador have a choice. Use
Yes.
the US dollar or use Bitcoin. What do you think is going to cause a shift in public usage, or what would it look like to have a tipping point where people are preferring to use Bitcoin?
I think it has to be, again, the education is important to make this change, because if the people doesn't believe and they just have bad press talking bad about Bitcoin, you don't have to this thing grow. So there are some associations of Bitcoin. They are working with little guys at the schools, teaching them how Bitcoin works, teaching them about economics and finance. And I think it's just about time, because for us, at my age, I'm 47 years old. If I was talking with you 4 years ago about this thing, I would be here talking completely different. But thank God I have the opportunity to come over here to know exceptional people here in the United States that give me the orientation that I need to understand. And that's why I'm sorry, my English is not good, evangelist of Bitcoin.
Well, I think your English is great, and even better, your country has been the evangelist. You have a young, dynamic president who, in a way, has been the emissary of Bitcoin to governments around the world. One last question. We've focused a lot on Bitcoin and its promise. What is it about Bitcoin that's distinct? Why do you think other cryptocurrencies are not going to be following this model? And why is it that other countries are looking to El Salvador, particularly for Bitcoin and not something broader?
I think because our president is Bitcoin maximalist. Our country is big. We think that Bitcoin is money, and we think that the other cryptocurrency, it could be business, not money. So basically, we have a law in digital assets to let you tokenize another kind of projects. But that projects are not Bitcoin. Bitcoin has his own law, he has his own regulation, and all the altcoins that want to come to El Salvador, they have to follow the rules for this digital assets law. There is an institution in El Salvador that is part of these digital assets who will receive all your information and will require some things that they need to prove that you are secure to come to El Salvador. And if you qualified, you can run your business as an altcoin in El Salvador, but more regulated than Bitcoin. Because it's easy to open the door and start to do a lot of tokenize more money, and you cannot do that with Bitcoin. So I think that's the main difference between altcoins and Bitcoin.
And one of the reasons that's been successful, and I think El Salvador is such a good example, is because of the clarity of its legal framework. It passed the Bitcoin law, La Ley Bitcoin, and that law lays out what the requirements are. Taxes can be paid. It must be accepted as legal tender. It is money. And I think other countries in the world can probably learn from that example. We've talked a lot about the uncertainty in the U.S. market because of regulation and complications as terms of which cryptocurrencies are securities, how are we going to regulate them. Maybe we can all learn from the El Salvador example.
What you have to know as a country is that you have to run at the same pace that the business and the technology is running. If you're not running as a country at the same pace, you will be behind.
Or you've been in Washington, D.C. for long enough to know the U.S. government has a tough time running at that pace.
Yeah, but this thing is one thing that you have to know, that if you as a country want to be running with the people, you have to work hard to understand. But if you don't want to understand how everything's working, you will be behind of everybody, behind of everything, and all the investors, the new people who has a lot of money because they are doing these things for a long time, they will just go. And this money is important money, and they will go to another country. That's why we are working on it.
Such as El Salvador.
Yeah, such as El Salvador. El Salvador is working really hard and give you opportunities in technology. For instance, we have this law that if you have a tech company and want to go to El Salvador, you don't pay taxes. We have this kind of benefits of taxes for business who wants to implement technology and bring working for our people. So we are open to anything that it will help to our country. We will check if everything is okay, but we are an open country to everyone who wants to invest in El Salvador. And if they need anything to know about it, we are an open embassy too. Our ambassador, this great ambassador, she will give all the information that you need. And I think that's the main thing, because our president is young, so he understands that everybody has to be faster than the people who wants to come to El Salvador to help them to improve our economy and bring all the business to El Salvador.
Well, this has been incredibly enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing these insights and the examples of your young president, Bukele, the attraction of business from the clear legal framework there. Any final word about Bitcoin in El Salvador?
Well, I think the first thing that I have to do is giving you thank you for bringing me here to talk about my country. And I think that our country will grow really fast in these 5 years. And this is an opportunity for the people who are involved in Bitcoin that knows that there are some paths that they have to travel around the different countries that they are. We are an open country to receive your investments in Bitcoin. And well, we're here to help everybody who wants to come to El Salvador, and we'll be more than glad to help them to know about our country. Even if they just want to go to do some tourism in El Salvador, we're open to talk with them and help them to go to El Salvador.
Thank you, Mardo. It's been such a pleasure.
No, the pleasure is all mine.